Hey everyone. Tonight we start with one of the coldest cases in human history that hasn't been solved yet. Literally frozen. We're talking about Ötzi the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old murder victim who is so well preserved that he looks like he fell asleep yesterday and forgot to set his alarm for the next 50 centuries. Before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Please tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments. It's interesting to see who is joining us from all over the world. There wasn't a team of top scientists, a dramatic excavation, or even a guy with a notebook pretending to know what sediment is when they found the Iceman. No, it started with two hikers in 1991 who just wanted to enjoy the Alps without falling to their deaths. They looked down and saw what they thought was a poor tourist who had really misread the weather report. The body was face down, with one arm stiff and the other twisted. Under him, like he had tried to stop his fall, but he remembered too late that human limbs don't really do that. His skin felt like sun-dried leather, and his whole vibe said, "I've been dead for a long time. Please stop poking me." Of course, the hikers called the police, because nothing ruins a peaceful walk in the Alps like realizing you've stumbled onto a crime scene from the Copper Age. The police came with the excitement they usually show when someone parks illegally. They saw the frozen body and thought it was just another climber who didn't pay attention to any safety signs. Then came the time that historians in the future will always find funny. The police tried to get his body out of the ice by pulling on his arm. That's correct. The same method that works for opening a stubborn pickle jar almost got rid of the oldest preserved body in Europe. But then someone saw the shoes. Not sneakers, not boots. Animal skin shoes. And grass. The kind of shoes you only see in documentaries with people with soothing voices. After that, they found the copper axe, very clean and polished, and definitely not from the modern hiker section at REI. People haven't used copper tools as standard equipment since they thought the wheel was a cool new thing. That's when I got it. This wasn't a recent death. This wasn't even a death from the Middle Ages. This man was 5,300 years old and had somehow refused to rot out of spite. Archaeologists were called in, and they came running like kids on Christmas morning. The police couldn't touch anything anymore, which was for the best, because the next logical move would have been for someone to yell, "Okay, let's just tug harder." And just like that, the Alps gave the world its oldest cold case, frozen, perfectly preserved, and ready for a forensic comeback tour in the making. If I had died in a forest, a field, or anywhere else, if the weather were normal, we wouldn't have anything. No body, no gear, and maybe a tooth or two if we were lucky. But Ötzi didn't die in a good spot. No, he picked a freezing mountaintop in the Alps, which was like hitting save on his whole life in prehistoric times. The glacier that took him in acted like a storage unit for a long time, the kind you forget to pay for, but somehow never loses your things. Because of thousands of years of ice, snow, and the universe's worst freezer burn, I was preserved with more detail than some. the skincare routines of famous people today. His skin had become a high-quality copper-age, weatherproof hide. His hair stayed intact because he was determined to keep it, saying, "I paid for this haircut, and I'm taking it with me to the afterlife." His fingernails, intestines, and even the contents of his stomach were still there. That's not keeping it safe. That's an overachievement on a cosmic level. When scientists looked at him for the first time, they basically said, "Wow, he looks great." Like, in a scary way. Great. He still had more than 60 tattoos on his body, mostly along his joints and pressure points. Early commentators said this had spiritual meaning. Later research showed that he probably just had chronic pain and made up acupuncture out of desperation, which makes sense. Nothing makes people come up with new ideas like having bad joints and no ibuprofen. His clothes were next. Fashionable for 3,300 BCE and CE, but also very messy. A coat made of goat fur, leggings made of sheepskin, and a hat made of brown bear fur, which says a lot about how confident he is and how much risk he can handle. His shoes were amazing. They had grass woven into the inside and deer skin on the outside. They were like Crocs for living in the mountains long ago, and we shouldn't forget about the bag. A wooden frame with leather straps that looks a lot like something you'd buy from a guy named Rune on Ötzi. He screamed about everything. This man knew how to stay alive, so it's even more embarrassing that he was killed. You can dress like the Batman of the past and still be killed by one well-placed arrow. The most amazing thing is that Ötzi stayed there for 5,300 years without anyone bothering him. There were no predators, scavengers, or even a curious goat. A man, a glacier, and a murder mystery that no one asked for are all getting older like fine wine. I didn't travel light, that's for sure. The man walked like he didn't trust anything at all. Not the weather, not the mountains, and not even other people, which, to be fair, turned out to be a sad. Correct gut feeling. When scientists made a list of his things, it looked like a doomsday prepper's backpack from the Copper Age. First, the copper axe, not some old piece of metal. This thing was a sign of power. A U-shaped wood handle holds a finely polished pure copper blade. 5,300 years ago, having this axe was like driving a brand new Mercedes through a village where everyone else had donkeys. It sent a message, I matter, and don't mess with me either. Then there was the bow. Sadly, it wasn't finished, which makes me wonder, did he break the old one? Did he have to hurry to fix it? Did someone violently break up his arts and crafts time? The bow was almost as tall as he was, and was made of wood. Once it was finished, it could kill a deer or a rude neighbor. His arrows were a whole story. Some were whole, and some were half finished. One of them had the wrong fletching angle, which showed that Ötzi was either in a hurry or had the prehistoric version of ADHD. Remember, this man died before he could finish his to-do list if you ever feel bad about putting things off. The knife comes next. A small blade made of flint with a wooden handle. Not fancy, but it works. And yes, it had blood from another person on it. Carrying a knife that has just been in another person is a sure sign that I've had a stressful morning. Researchers found 4 different blood types on his gear, so Ötzi wasn't just running away from danger, he had taken part. He had a fire starter kit, like a man who had been let down by the weather before. Flint, pyrite, and tinder fungus. Everything you need to start a fire in any weather, except for a full-blown flood. We also can't forget the first aid kit. Bunches of birch polyory fungus. It fights inflammation, bacteria, and parasites. This wasn't a story. This was effective prehistoric farm pharmacology. The man was treating infections before infection was even a word. Finally, the frame backpack, reinforced wooden structure, leather straps, sturdy, practical, and 100% Ötzi core. It held everything from tools to food scraps, proving the man believed in being prepared for absolutely anything. Anything, except apparently an arrow to the back. If there's one thing Odie didn't do before dying, it was skip lunch. In fact, the man's final hours look less like a desperate flight for survival and more like someone panic eating their way through a crisis. Thanks to the icy miracle of nature's longest running refrigerator, scientists were able to analyze not just his bones and organs, but the snack choices he made shortly before being murdered. And let me tell you, Ötzi went out with a full stomach. His last meal was a prehistoric charcuterie board. Ibex meat, red deer, spelt grains, fat, pollen, and what can only be described as wild herbs someone claimed were healthy. Basically, he ate the Copper Age version of a protein-heavy meal prep box designed by a caveman nutrition influencer. What's fascinating and slightly comedic is that he ate 2 distinct meals before he died, like a man who couldn't decide if he needed fuel for a hike or comfort food for emotional devastation. Meal 1. This earlier meal shows no stress markers, no elevated activity, no panic. He was just vibing, eating ibex meat, enjoying his day, totally unaware that someone would soon turn him into a historical celebrity corpse. Meal 2. This one was different. The ibex meat was consumed under stress. His metabolism was in fight or flight mode. Basically, he inhaled his food like someone who had just been told, "Listen, you might want to eat now. You won't get the chance later." We know this because his stomach still held visible layers of chewed fat and meat, the digestive equivalent of leaving your browser tabs open at the moment of your death. And here's the wildest part. Researchers found fresh pollen from plants blooming in warm valleys. Yet, he died high in the mountains, meaning sometime that day he had traveled from valley warmth to icy heights in a hurry. You don't climb thousands of feet unless you're incredibly motivated, you're incredibly stupid, or someone is trying to kill you. Given the arrow in his back, we're going with door number 3. The meal also had charcoal traces, which suggests Odie cooked something moments before being murdered. Imagine that. Standing over a fire, grilling your last bite of ibex, thinking, "Ah yes, nothing like a warm meal before a long climb," while your assassin is somewhere behind a boulder, thinking, "Perfect, he's distracted." So, yes, I's Last Supper wasn't ceremonial, spiritual, or poetic. It was stress eating, and unfortunately, not nearly enough. If Ötzi's final hours were a movie, this is where the soundtrack would shift from peaceful mountain flutes to something is very wrong drums. By the time he started climbing the Alps for the last time, he wasn't just tired or stressed, he was visibly injured. And not, I stubbed my toe on a rock injured more. I've just had a physical altercation with multiple humans, and none of them sent a follow up apology. His hands told the story first. Fresh cuts, several of them, not old scars or ancient wounds, but brand new slices, the kind you get when someone is trying to hit you, stab you, or politely request your death. His knuckles were swollen, which suggests he wasn't just blocking blows. He was swinging back. Imagine the world's coldest bar fight, except instead of a bar, it's a forested valley, and instead of beer, you have water from a glacial stream and the deep, bone-crushing knowledge that bathrooms have not been invented yet. Ötzi's knife added another chapter to the tale. It had traces of blood on it, not his, and the blood belonged to multiple individuals. This means one thing. Ötzi had been dealing with more than one opponent. Whether he fought one after another like a prehistoric action hero or was overwhelmed in a chaotic group skirmish, we'll never know. What we do know is that he did not leave that fight. Unmarked, his gear was damaged, his body was wearing the aftermath, and his general energy screamed, I need a nap, a doctor, and maybe divine intervention. What makes the scene even more dramatic is what he did next. Ötzi began repairing his bow, not casually, urgently. Half-assembled arrows, a half-finished bowring, wooden shafts carved in haste. The man was preparing for another confrontation. You don't sit down after a fight, bleeding and exhausted, and start doing arts and crafts unless you believe violence is. Coming back for round 2, his movements in the hours after the fight paint a clear picture. He was trying to get away. He climbed upward into dangerous terrain, the kind no sane person chooses, unless they're either extremely confident or extremely hunted. With the injured hands and a partially repaired weapon, he pushed toward higher ground, leaving behind the valley where everything had gone wrong. He wasn't wandering. He wasn't lost. He was retreating, fast, wounded, and deeply aware that someone wasn't finished with him yet. By the time Ötzi was climbing the final stretch of the Alps, he was essentially a walking crime scene, held together by adrenaline, ibex fat, and the stubborn refusal to die somewhere inconvenient. But fate, or his murderer, had other plans. The defining moment of this entire saga came not from his knife, not from his injuries, and not from the suspiciously unfinished bow he was trying to assemble mid-crisis. It came from an arrow, a single shot, a perfect strike launched by someone who either had remarkable aim or had been practicing on many, many previous victims. Forensic scans showed the arrow entered his back at an angle only possible if his killer was behind him and slightly above, meaning someone had taken the literal high ground. The arrow tore through muscle, pierced into his left shoulder, and severed an artery. This wasn't an oops, missed the dear moment. This was intentional, precise, and as subtle as a prehistoric text message saying, "We are done here." Once that arrow hit, Ötzi wouldn't have lasted long, minutes at best. The force of the shot was strong enough to bury the flint arrowhead so deeply that even modern scanners had to work to find it. The shaft had broken off, likely in the chaos as he fell, leaving the tip lodged securely in his body for 5,300 years. What's almost tragic is that Ötzi probably never even saw it coming. He was moving uphill, exhausted from earlier conflict, clutching gear that was only partially functional and likely trying to put distance between himself and the people who were very clearly trying to make him one with the Glacia. The killer waited until exhaustion and altitude had done their job, then delivered a clean, lethal blow from behind, the Copper Age version of a professional hit. The moment the arrow struck, Ötzi would have lost strength instantly. His blood pressure dropped, his breath faltered, and whatever fight he had left evaporated. He collapsed on the stone and ice, face first, without even having time to turn around. The scene is haunting. A man frozen in the exact posture of his death, arms extended, body limp, knife still strapped to him, tools scattered in the snow he never meant to fall on. There were no final words, no dramatic last stand, no heroic retaliation, just a silent, sudden ending, the kind of death only a skilled assassin or extremely committed enemy could deliver. Sai wasn't just attacked, he was executed. Ötzi's last moments were not glamorous. There was no dramatic speech, no heroic final stand, no ancient equivalent of, "Tell my family I love them." Instead, his final act on Earth was collapsing face first onto a slab of ice with the exhausted grace of someone who'd simply had enough of the day's nonsense. After the arrow struck, he staggered a little farther uphill because apparently he believed climbing higher would help, as if altitude had ever solved anyone's problems. The Alps were not on his side. The landscape was steep, the air thin, and Ötzi's blood was rapidly leaving the building like an unimpressed theater audience. His heart and lungs were failing, and any attempt to fight back, scream, or sprint was impossible. Physiologically speaking, he was out of moves. He fell forward, arms bled, like a man who had been denied even the dignity of choosing a comfortable position to die in. Modern archaeologists found him in the exact posture he collapsed in, not rearranged, not disturbed, just lying there with the defeated stillness of a person who thought, "You know what? I'm not getting up from this." One could argue the Glacia was both cruel and kind. Cruel because it offered him nowhere to hide, no shelter, not even a soft patch of snow to cushion his fall. Kind because once he was down, it embraced him with millennia of ice and said, "Don't worry, buddy, I'll handle the preservation." The killer didn't come back to check the body, loot the gear, or confirm the job. They simply left. Whoever shot him must have known the wound was fatal, or maybe they had other problems to deal with, like running before Ötzi's friends. Arrived, or pretending they hadn't just committed the oldest documented homicide in human history. And so the Alps kept him. Wind, ice, snow, storms, none of it moved him. His body slowly froze, then became part of the glacier itself, preserved better than any pharaoh wrapped in gold. No animals got to him, no scavengers clawed at him. Even nature seemed to say, "We're saving this one, he looks important." Little did anyone know, 5,000 years later, Ötzi would be found exactly as he fell, like a prehistoric crime scene photo waiting for someone to finally show up and file the report. His final collapse wasn't just a tragic moment. It became the opening scene of the world's oldest cold case. If Ötzi himself couldn't tell us who killed him, his blood certainly tried. Unfortunately, blood is terrible at keeping secrets when you have modern forensic technology, and turned out to be the biological equivalent of a messy group chat. When scientists analyzed the microscopic traces left on his tools and clothing, they weren't expecting anything dramatic. Maybe some deer residue, maybe something he cooked earlier that day. What they found instead was straight out of a prehistoric crime drama. 4 different human blood types. This means that in the hours before his death, Ötzi had interacted with or stabbed at least 4 other people. And given that only one of them was him, things start looking suspiciously like the Copper Age was less peaceful, Neolithic farming community, and more every man for himself. Please bring your own weapons. His flint knife held the most concerning evidence. Someone else's blood smeared along the blade, and not dried old flecks from weeks ago. Fresh patterns consistent with recent contact. His arrows had similar traces, suggesting they had been shot, retrieved, and possibly reused. Archaeologists politely call this evidence of conflict. A less academic term would be this man was busy. The blood found on his gear paints a timeline. First, there was the close quarters skirmish, the one that left. Ötzi with cut hands, bruises, and the kind of emotional exhaustion only achievable when fighting multiple people without proper hydration. Then there was the retreat, the frantic attempt to escape up the mountain, and the desperate scramble to repair his weapons. And finally, the fatal arrow fired by a pursuer who apparently had the accuracy of an Olympic archer and the ethics of a soap opera villain. But the most haunting detail comes from the shield-like structure of the blood itself. The splatter on his coat and tools suggests might have helped someone right before running. Some researchers believe he attempted to carry or aid a wounded companion. If true, that means his final hours weren't just violent. They were tragic, heroic, and deeply unlucky. Imagine trying to save someone only to be chased up a mountain and shot for your trouble. Prehistoric friendship was a dangerous game. In the end, the blood patterns turned from frozen hiker into last survivor of a very bad afternoon. His tools weren't just supplies, they were evidence. 4 blood types, 1 murder victim, and a mystery written in red, preserved in ice. If there is one detail in this entire murder case that keeps the archaeologists up at night, it's the copper axe, not the arrow in his back, Not the 4 different people's blood on his gear, not the fact that his final moments looked like an ancient episode of Man versus Everything. No, it's that nobody stole the axe. This was not some ordinary tool. A copper axe in 3300 BCE was a luxury item. Not nice outfit luxury, more like you are officially the coolest guy in a 50-mile radius. Copper was rare, hard to extract, and even harder to work. Owning a polished copper blade meant status, authority, and probably a little prehistoric swagger. So why was it still on's body? If this had been a robbery, the killer would have taken the axe immediately. If it had been an opportunistic attack, the weapon would have vanished long before the ice ever touched him, even if the killer didn't personally want it. They could have traded it for food, clothes, or a slightly less miserable life expectancy. But instead, it was left behind neatly, deliberately, untouched, almost like the murderer wanted the world to know. This wasn't about the stuff. This was about him. This single detail transforms the crime from a random act of violence into something much pettier and far more human. A personal grudge. Someone wanted Ötzi dead, yes, but they didn't want to benefit from it. They weren't trying to rob him or humiliate him. They just wanted him gone permanently. One theory suggests the killer may have been part of Ötzi's own group, someone who would have recognized the axe instantly and understood its value, yet still left it. Perhaps they didn't take it because everyone in the tribe would have recognized it. Imagine showing up to camp with your murdered friend's prized copper axe. Oh, hey guys, don't mind this. I found it. Not a great alibi. Another theory, even colder, is that the killer left the axe as a message, something symbolic, like saying, I didn't kill you for your belongings. I killed you because I had a problem with you. And if that isn't the most human, petty, passive, aggressive motive imaginable, I don't know what is. The copper axe lying untouched beside the body doesn't solve the case, but it does tell us one thing clearly. Whoever killed didn't want his riches. They wanted his silence. If there is one theme that repeats through human history like a broken drum, it's betrayal. Romans betrayed each other. Medieval kings betrayed each other. Your coworker probably betrayed you by taking credit for that spreadsheet. But Ötzi, he may have been the first recorded victim of the classic smile at you over lunch, stab you in the back later routine. Literally, science shows that shortly before he died, Ötzi shared a meal with someone. The pollen in his stomach, the meat he ate, even the way the food was cooked all point to a social moment, a fire, companionship, not the vibe of a man hiding alone in. The bushes like a terrified prehistoric raccoon. He wasn't eating in secret. He wasn't starving. He ate a full, warm meal with help. Whoever prepared or shared that food with him was close, trusted, familiar, possibly even bonded with him through the shared trauma of ancient life, where everything, weather, wildlife, other humans, could kill you with impressive enthusiasm. And yet, hours later, someone shot him in the back. We're not talking about an arrow fired by a stranger stumbling across him in the mountains. We're talking about a shot that required timing, tracking, and intimate knowledge of where I would be. The killer didn't ambush him randomly. They followed him, waited, watched. They knew he'd climb. They knew he'd flee upward. They knew he'd be exhausted from earlier conflict. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from a passing enemy. It comes from someone who knows your habits, someone who knows your footsteps, someone who knows you trust them enough to sit down and eat a meal without checking behind you every 3 seconds. Betrayal in the Copper Age wasn't subtle. There were no passive-aggressive texts or vague social media posts. There were only two options. Discuss your feelings like a civilized human, or shoot your problems in the back with a flint-tipped arrow. And it's clear which options Companion chose. Imagine the scene. Two men sitting by the fire, eating calmly, maybe even joking about how exhausting survival is. Then something changes. A disagreement, a rivalry, a threat, or a decision that someone wasn't willing to let go. Hours later, that same man pulled back a bowring and aimed steadily at Ötzi's spine. When the arrow flew, it carried not just flint, but intention. So when people say the Alps killed him, they're wrong. It wasn't the mountain. It was someone he trusted. Us's killer vanished into history with the confidence of someone absolutely certain no one would ever investigate a homicide on top of a glacier. And honestly, that was a pretty safe assumption for roughly 5,000 years. There were no witnesses, no DNA databases, no police sketches, no irritated detectives sipping coffee and saying, "Something doesn't add up here, Johnson." There was only silence, snow, and a cooling body lying face down in the world's most remote crime scene. After the arrow struck, the murderer didn't bother to confirm the kill or take a trophy. No dramatic villain speech, no looting, not even a polite toe poke to check if Ötzi was still breathing. They simply walked away, presumably with the calm satisfaction of someone saying, "Great, that problem is handled," and immediately failing to consider that glaciers are extremely judgmental and excellent at long-term storage. What happened next is the part that frustrates every archaeologist. The aftermath we'll never see. Did the killer return to his group and pretend nothing happened? Did he explain away the arrow he just used? Did he say Ötzi wandered off like a prehistoric toddler at a marketplace? Did the group even care? Humans love drama, but prehistoric humans also loved minding their own business. We'll never know which category this particular tribe fell into. And what about the people whose blood ended up on gear? Did they survive their injuries? Did they limp home and spin an entirely different version of events, painting themselves as the hero and Ötzi as the problem? If you've ever heard two people describe the same argument, you already know those stories would not have matched. We also can't. See how the tribe reacted when Ötzi didn't return. Was he missed? Was he important? Was he the local troublemaker people tolerated out of obligation? Maybe they had a brief moment of concern before shrugging and saying, "Well, that's the mountains for you." Or maybe his absence sparked conflict, suspicion, or a quiet panic that their own group had turned on itself. The truth is, after I collapsed, the world around him kept turning. His people lived, argued, hunted, slept, and aged without him. His killer continued existing, carrying the secret of a perfect murder, a secret they thought would dissolve into snow and wind, not parade itself across every museum documentary ever made. The aftermath is forever missing, but the silence that followed his death that lasted 5,000 years. If I could see the number of scientists who have examined him over the past 3 decades, he would probably file a harassment complaint. The man has been poked, scanned, sliced, swabbed, x-rayed, DNA tested, and analyzed from every angle except his. Thoughts and Feelings tab, because unfortunately, that's the only category the glacier didn't preserve. Once he was hauled out of the ice, modern forensic science descended on him like kids attacking a piñata. Except instead of candy, they got data endless, glorious data. His teeth gave clues about his childhood diet. His bones revealed injuries from his final days. His fingernails told the story of stress cycles leading up to the murder. Even his hair held chemical signatures that tracked everywhere he had been in the bow weeks before he died, which is impressive considering most living people don't remember what they did last Tuesday. His tattoos, more than 60 of them, were a highlight. Not the artistic kind you get from a tattoo parlor with a playlist. These were simple lines and crosses strategically placed along joints and muscle groups. Researchers once assumed they were spiritual symbols, but further analysis suggests something much less mystical. He was trying to treat chronic pain, essentially giving himself prehistoric acupuncture. So, the oldest tattooed man on Earth wasn't a ritual leader or an artist. He was just someone with terrible back pain and no access to ibuprofen. Then came the ultimate forensic flex, CT scans. Us has been scanned more than the average airport traveler. Doctors reconstructed his arteries, blood vessels, internal organs, even his facial structure, all from imagery so detailed you could practically diagnose his stress levels. They discovered heart disease, arthritis, dental problems, and parasites. Basically, a full medical report that screams life in 3300 BCE was rough. His stomach contents were another investigative gold mine. With high-resolution imaging, researchers identified every component of his last meal down to the exact cut of ibex meat and the degree of fat marbling. It's the kind of analysis no modern person once applied to their midnight fridge raids. But the biggest find, a tiny, nearly invisible tear in one of his arteries. Proof of the fatal arrow. Wound. No dramatics, no ambiguity, just cold clinical truth served with prehistoric flair. In the end, I unwittingly became the star of the most thorough forensic examination in human history. CSY teams dream of cases this clear. Doctors dream of patients this well-preserved. Ötzi. He probably just wanted to be left alone. After 3 decades of research, countless publications, and more scientific debates than any frozen corpse should ever inspire, one thing remains painfully clear. Nobody can agree on why. Ötzi died. Sure, we know how. The arrow to the back was not subtle, but the why has launched more theories than a conspiracy forum on a slow Tuesday. One theory suggests tribal conflict. Maybe Ötzi stumbled into a feud between neighboring groups. Maybe someone from another village didn't appreciate his copper axe flex. Or maybe he insulted the wrong person's goats because in 3300 BCE, livestock drama was basically international politics. Under this theory, I was collateral damage in a conflict far bigger than himself. Another popular explanation is the territorial dispute. Humans have always been weirdly attached to land, even land that is cold, rocky, and generally hostile to life. It's possible that Ötzi wandered into someone else's hunting zone, someone who responded with the prehistoric equivalent of, "Get off my lawn," followed immediately by, "Here's an arrow in your lung for emphasis." Then there's the leadership theory, which is very flattering to some researchers, think he may have been a leader, maybe even a chief. His valuable belongings, especially the copper axe, support the idea. If so, his death could have been a political assassination. Prehistoric politics were likely as chaotic as modern politics, except with fewer speeches and more stabbing. A more dramatic theory is revenge. Remember those 4 different blood types on his gear? That suggests I had a very hands-on day before his death. Perhaps he injured someone earlier or killed someone during a fight, and their comrades pursued him into the mountains. If that's true, I didn't just die. He lost a rematch he didn't even want. And then there's my personal favorite, the personal drama theory. Humans are messy creatures, always have been, always will be. Maybe this wasn't about land or politics or tribes. Maybe it was something absurdly personal, a stolen tool, a broken promise, a romantic rivalry, the Copper Age version of "you said you'd help me build a fence and then you didn't." Under this theory, murder wasn't historical. It was petty. But here's the truth. All these theories keep circulating because humans desperately want motives to make sense. We want clean narratives. We want answers. But prehistoric life wasn't organized enough for tidy explanations. In the end, the theories won't die because they're all possible. But unfortunately, Ötzi didn't get the same privilege. 5,000 years is a long time to stay relevant. Most people can barely stay relevant for 5 months. But Ötzi, he's aging like a fine archaeological wine, still revealing secrets, still inspiring documentaries, still accidentally teaching us about the human condition. His death matters not because he was royalty or a celebrity or a man of great political influence. It matters because he was painfully, wonderfully ordinary, and his death preserved a snapshot of prehistoric life that textbooks can't fake. Before Ötzi, most of what we knew about the European Copper Age was guesswork based on pottery shards, stone tools, and the occasional burial site that looked more like a decorative pile of bones than anything with context. But Ötzi changed the game. He wasn't just a skeleton, he was a whole human. Clothes, tools, stomach contents, tattoos, wounds, drama. He was the full package, the Copper Age influencer we never asked for. His death also forced researchers to rethink assumptions about early societies. For decades, historians painted prehistoric Europe as this peaceful, cozy era where everyone held hands, shared berries, and sang songs about communal harmony. Then Yuzi popped out. Of the ice, tattooed, armed, injured, and murdered, and historians collectively said, "Ah, so humans have always been like this." He showed the brutality and complexity of early life. People fought, people hunted, people held grudges, and people performed medical treatments sophisticated enough to make modern wellness influencers jealous. His tattoos proved early humans understood chronic pain. His gear proved they understood craftsmanship. His clothing proved they understood insulation better than some modern outdoor brands. Even his final moments matter. The arrow still embedded in him revealed early battlefield tactics. Ambush from behind, shoot for the arteries, don't stick around, a crime as old as humanity itself, preserved in the ice with forensic perfection. And the global fascination with his story tells us something important. People crave a personal connection to the past. We don't just want dates and timelines. We want a face, a life, a mystery. Sai provides all three. He matters because he collapsed on a glacier at the exact angle that allowed science to piece together his last day like a Copper Age puzzle. He matters because his story is both tragic and relatable, the tale of a man trying to survive a world that wasn't built to be kind. And ultimately, he matters because his death reminds us that history is not distant. It's human, messy, violent, emotional, and apparently excellent at preservation. If a detective from the modern world were transported back to 3300 BCE, they'd probably last 15 minutes before quitting. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no security cameras, no forensics labs. And yet, somehow, the universe decided to preserve Yusi's crime scene so perfectly that thousands of years later, modern science managed to do what no Copper Age detective ever could: solve the world's oldest cold case. Quite literally, a cold case refrigerated by nature itself. The irony is delicious. Us's killer probably walked away from the scene convinced they had committed the perfect murder. A remote mountaintop, a dying man, no one around. The Alps make an excellent accomplice, a silent, icy partner who tells no tales. Except the glacier wasn't loyal. It kept every detail. It filed every piece of evidence. It protected the body, the clothes, the tools, the wounds, the stomach contents, and yes, even the murder weapon still embedded in his shoulder. The glacier was the best forensic archist in history. It just took 5 millennia to open the file. And what does the file say? It tells the story of a man chased up a mountain, wounded, exhausted, then struck down by a well-aimed arrow. It reveals friends, enemies, or frenemies involved in a violent confrontation before the final blow. It shows the desperate repairs to his weapons, the panic meal, the retreat to higher ground. It shows betrayal, fear, survival instinct, and finally, collapse. Modern forensics close the case in a way Copper Age people never could. CT scans revealed the torn artery. Blood analysis revealed multiple attackers. Tattoo mapping revealed chronic pain. DNA sequencing revealed his ancestry. Pollen analysis revealed the route he took. Even the microscopic abrasions on his arrows revealed how he used them in the final struggle. This level of detail is why Yudi's murder is not just a story, it's a legacy. He didn't choose to become the most scientifically examined man in history. He didn't choose to have his last moments replayed in every documentary ever made. He didn't choose fame, he just had the misfortune to die in an exceptionally well-preserving freezer. And yet, his story endures because it's not about kings or empires. It's about a human being flawed, injured, running, fighting, eating, surviving until he didn't. The case is closed, the mystery solved, the killer gone forever. But Ötzi, he remains, a frozen witness, telling his story long after everyone involved turned to dust. The oldest murder in history didn't stay buried. The ice made sure of that. At the heart of ancient Rome, long, before the sense of modern cafes and street vendors filled our cities, there stood a place every Roman, rich or poor, knew intimately, the Thermopylaeum picture, a narrow street where sunlight bounces off clay tiles, where wagons rumble slowly over uneven stones, and where every corner hums with chatter about gladiators, taxes, and whatever scandal the emperor has created this week. Now picture, tucked between a baker's shop and a linen stall, a lively open-air tavern with its marble counter, jutting out toward the street like an invitation. This is the Roman equivalent of a fast food stand, and at almost any hour of the day, it is crowded. The counter itself is the heart of the experience, built from stone or brick and polished smooth by generations of forearms leaning over it. It's lined with deep terracotta jars, doya resting in circular holes. Each jar holds something warm, fragrant, and ready to eat. Lentil stew simmering in a thick earthy broth, olives swimming in brine, honeyed nuts, spiced chickpeas, or even leftover cuts of pork soaking in garum. The infamous fermented fish sauce Romans loved far more than we ever could. Steam rises from the warmer jars, carrying hints of herbs like lovage, fennel, and thyme. Before the lunch crowds arrive, the owner wipes down the counter, stirs the pots, and checks the coals beneath the jars to keep everything at just the right heat. Behind him, a small kitchen rattles with activity, wood crackling, ladles tapping against clay, and a young helper trying not to burn himself while fishing out stew with a long-handled spoon. By late morning, the first customers appear. Laborers with dust on their tunics, fishermen coming in from the river, a tired-looking scribe escaping his cramped office for a moment of warmth and gossip. They step up, balancing clay bowls in one hand and coins in the other. There are no chairs, no private tables, no polished settings, just the counter, the street, and the constant flow of life surrounding them. They eat standing, leaning slightly, forward to avoid dripping stew on their sandals, half listening to the conversations around them. And this is where the magic begins, because a Thermopylaeum was more than a place to eat. It was where everyday Romans came to refill their stomachs and their spirits, catching up on news, scandals, and the pulse of the city itself. A thermopolium did not offer a grand feast, but what it lacked in elegance, it made up for in warmth, familiarity, and the irresistible comfort of simple food. The menu changed from tavern to tavern, but certain staples appeared everywhere. Humble dishes that fueled Rome's laborers, sailors, and market vendors from sunrise to dusk. The moment you stepped up to the counter, you could smell the day's offerings before you ever saw them. First, there was pulse, the thick wheat porridge that had sustained Romans for centuries. Sometimes it was plain and practical, little more than grain and water. Other times it was enriched with herbs or cooked with bits of vegetables, forming a soft, hearty base that stuck to the ribs. Next to it, simmered lentil stew, dark and earthy, thickened by hours of slow cooking. The lentils softened until they nearly dissolved, creating a creamy texture flavored with garlic, olive oil, and crushed coriander seeds. This was one of the cheapest meals available, perfect for men who needed energy more than refinement. Beside the stews sat bowls piled high with olives, their skins glossy from the brine, black, green, wrinkled, or smooth. Each type carried a slightly different taste, and patrons often took a handful to snack on as they walked. If a tavern was lucky enough to be close to the coast, you might also find pickled fish, salted anchovies, or scraps of tuna preserved in oil. But no Roman meal felt complete without bread. Not the soft, airy loaves we know today, but dense rounds of wheat or barley, often stamped with a bakery mark. Customers tore off chunks to scoop stew, soak up sauces, or simply chew between sips of cheap wine, watered down just enough to stretch the taverns. Supplies. And then, of course, came garum, Rome's favorite flavor enhancer. Sharp, salty, and utterly unmistakable, it was drizzled over nearly everything. A bowl of lentils became richer, a slice of bread gained depth. Even olives found new life when dipped lightly into the fermented sauce. To the Romans, garum was not strange. It was essential, the taste of home, the taste of the empire itself. As customers ate, they wiped their bowls clean, returned them to the counter, and if coins allowed, ordered seconds for. Many. This simple, fragrant menu was not a treat, but a daily routine. The fuel that kept the entire city moving hour after hour. If there was one thing that defined street food in ancient Rome, it was movement. Nothing stood still for long, not the crowds, not the gossip, not even the customers themselves. Eating at a thermopolium was never a leisurely event. There were no cushioned seats, no shade-lined terraces, no servers gracefully weaving between tables. Instead, Romans ate standing up, balancing clay bowls in their palms, while shifting their weight to avoid being bumped by those rushing past. The rhythm of the street didn't stop just because a man wanted lunch. So patrons learned to adapt, leaning against walls, fountain edges, or even each other as they spooned stew into their mouths. The bowls were rounded and small enough to cradle easily, yet deep enough to hold a hearty portion of lentils, chickpeas, or barley porridge. Bread was torn one-handed, used as both utensil and sponge, and wine, often watered down, was gulped from simple ceramic cups. A quick meal meant efficiency, and the average Roman had perfected the skill. The standing habit was not only practical, but social. Hunger brought people together, and the Thermopylaeum acted as a sort of informal neighborhood forum. One man might be finishing a bowl while another squeezed in beside him, already launching into a complaint about taxes or the heat. Someone else might be recounting the results of last night's chariot race, a fisherman brushing salt. From his tunic might jokingly argue with a baker about whose work was tougher. Even strangers briefly became companions, connected by the shared moment of pausing in a city that rarely paused for anything. This style of eating reinforced a deep Roman preference. Meals were for necessity, not luxury, unless you were wealthy. While the aristocrats reclined on couches at private banquets, the working classes considered a filling bowl eaten upright to be perfectly normal. For them, eating standing wasn't. A sign of hardship, but simply a rhythm of life. It allowed them to finish lunch in minutes before returning to their trade chores or daily responsibilities. What made the scene even more vivid was the constant backdrop of sound: vendors shouting, children running, pots clattering, donkeys braying, and fountains splashing. All of it mingled with the aroma of warm stew and fresh bread. And amidst this daily commotion, the simple act of eating while standing became a uniquely Roman ritual, fast, functional, and full of human connection. If the Thermopylaeum fed the stomach, it also fed something even more essential to Roman life: conversation. These crowded street taverns were the beating heart of everyday gossip. News did not spread through tidy announcements or written bulletins. It passed from mouth to mouth, ladle to bowl, customer to customer. Anyone who stepped up for a quick meal became part of this living network of whispers, jokes, rumors, and bold opinions about the events shaping the city. The favorite topic: gladiators. Rome's working class citizens loved them with the same energy modern crowds reserve for famous athletes. As bowls were filled and coins exchanged, someone inevitably brought up yesterday's fight in the amphitheater. Did you see that ghoul's footwork? Swift as mercury, one man might say, waving his spoon midair. Another shook his head, dismissive. Footwork means nothing if he can't hold a shield. I'm betting on the Thrian next time. Even those who couldn't afford a ticket to the arena felt they were part of the action through these heated debates. But gladiators were only the beginning. People gossiped about everything: emperors, senators, grain shortages, military campaigns, scandals, marriages, divorces, and hopelessly corrupt tax collectors. A rumor could take shape in under a minute. One man mentioned that the emperor seemed ill during a public appearance. By afternoon, half the neighborhood was convinced Roman. Politics would collapse by nightfall. Another whispered that a wealthy noblewoman had secretly divorced her husband. Someone else swore they saw her slipping into a merchant's home after dark. Truth, exaggeration, and imagination merged seamlessly. The Thermopylaeum owner occasionally tried to calm the uproar, but he rarely succeeded. His tavern was less a restaurant and more a stage where Rome performed itself. Market women chimed in with sharp insights. Dock workers described the latest shipments from Egypt. A young, Apprentice boasted about overhearing his master talk to a senator, though no one believed him. All of it flowed freely from group to group, turning strangers into conversational partners. In a city of 1 million souls, where most people lived in cramped, noisy apartments, the Thermopolium became a place where daily life felt shared. Worries softened when spoken aloud, opinions sharpened when challenged, and even the simplest bowl of lentils tasted richer when eaten in the middle of a heated debate about who would triumph in the next gladiator match. Here, standing between simmering jars and passing crowds, Romans found nourishment not only in food, but in the stories that tied their lives together. Before you even reached the counter of a Thermopolium, your senses announced its presence. The smells drifted first. Warm lentils softened in olive oil, chickpea mash spiced with cumin, roasted nuts glazed in honey, and unmistakably, the sharp tang of garum wafting through the air like a beacon of Roman identity. These aromas mingled with the scent of wet stone, sweat, incense from nearby shrines, and the ever-present dust kicked up by passing carts. The entire street became a tapestry of fragrances, both pleasant and overwhelming, reflecting the raw truth of a crowded ancient city. Next came the sounds. Rome never slept, but during the midday rush, it roared. Shopkeepers shouted prices, children chased each other between stalls, and traveling merchants clanged bronze trinkets together to draw attention. In the distance, a blacksmith hammered iron into shape. Clang, hiss, clang. While a donkey braided in protest as a handler tugged it through the hush of people, patrons gathered around the Thermopolium added their own layer of noise. Clay bowls clinking against the counter, ladles scraping the bottoms of deep jars, and voices overlapping in a dozen simultaneous conversations. Then there was the chaos, the kind that would overwhelm someone unused to Roman life, but felt completely natural to those who grew up in its rhythm. People moved constantly. Shoppers with baskets full of figs, soldiers on errands, fishermen carrying nets that dripped onto the pavement, young apprentices racing to deliver messages for their masters, and slaves hurrying with jars of water balanced precariously on their shoulders. Everyone seemed to be in motion except the Thermopolium owner, who somehow remained steady amid the whirlwind, stirring stew, serving bowls, making change, and shouting orders to his helper without missing a beat. Street performers occasionally joined the fray, a flute player hoping for a coin, a juggler showing off for a crowd, or a storyteller reciting cheeky verses about the latest scandal. Their presence added color to the street, giving customers something to watch while waiting for their meal. What made the Thermopolium environment so remarkable was the sense of shared space. No walls separated diners from the street. No doors muted the sounds. Eating here meant being part of Rome's daily heartbeat. Every scent, shout, and the shuffle of feet became part of the experience. People didn't just eat food, it was lived in, surrounded by the full, unfiltered energy of one of the greatest cities in history. Romans found comfort in this mess. Life was noise, and noise was life. The men and women who turned raw ingredients into the daily food of the Roman people stood behind every steaming pot and every freshly filled bowl. The people who worked at the Thermopolium were not rich restaurant owners or famous chefs. They were regular Romans, and many of them came from poor families, and had to deal with the city's hunger. Their world was always hot, always moving, and always loud. The cowpo, who was usually the owner, was the most important person in the business. He got up before dawn, when the city was still dark and quiet, to start making food for the day. Before customers even got there, he had already lit the fire, set up the clay jars, ground herbs with a stone mortar, and stirred pots full of lentils that needed hours to become soft. He moved quickly and with purpose, like a craftsman rather than a simple cook. He knew exactly how much salt to add when the chickpeas were just right, and how to keep the stew warm without burning it. Apprentices or slaves, usually boys or young men, worked next to him and did the hardest work, though they were often less noticed. They got water from public fountains, chopped up vegetables, cleaned cooking pots that were covered in soot, and ran back and forth to nearby markets to get more bread or olives. When there weren't enough supplies, their tunics always smelled like smoke and stew, and their hands were always dirty with oil. But without them, the Thermopolium wouldn't work for even an hour. Women were also involved, especially in family-run taverns. During the busiest times of the day, they might knead bread, season food, count coins, or serve customers. Some even made small desserts, like honeyed pastries, to sell with the savory meals. Their voices were often sharp, practical, and experienced, cutting through the noise with orders or warnings yelled over the counter. Being a good Thermopolium required more than just being a good cook. It took a lot of work. The workers had to deal with the heat from the stove, the heavy clay pots they had to lift, and the constant stream of customers who wanted quick service. People were always trading coins. When the portions seemed too small, tempers flared, and the owner had to use both his business and diplomatic skills to keep everyone happy. People didn't often praise these workers. Most customers didn't even notice how hard they worked. They only looked at the food in their bowls. But their work made them the quiet backbone of Roman street life. Every day, thousands of people found food. They fed soldiers, sailors, merchants, craftsmen, beggars, travelers, and many others. This helped keep the largest city in the ancient world alive and moving. Their help was small, but very important. No meal at a Thermopolium was complete without a drink to wash it down. And in ancient Rome, wine was the drink of choice. Was wine, no matter what time it was. Roman wine may have tasted harsh, thick, or too sweet to modern taste buds, but it was a daily need for the people of the empire. Even the poorest Romans thought they should have a cup of it with lunch. Of course, not the best vintages. Those were saved for banquets and noble homes. Instead, it was a cheap, mass-produced kind that flowed as freely as the Tiber itself. Romans thought it was civilized to mix wine with water at street taverns, which was almost always the case. Very important. People who drank wine straight from the barrel were thought to be barbarians, wild ghouls, rude Thryans, or anyone who didn't follow Roman rules. So even at the most basic thermopolium, the owner kept a jug of water next to the wine jar to make the drink last longer. It didn't always make the food taste better, but it kept the price low and the customer happy. A customer might ask for wine with a splash of vinegar on hot days. Puska is a sour drink that is popular with. Soldiers and workers liked it because it was cheap and had a sharp bite that cut through the heat and dust. Even a man with only a few coins to spare could afford it. If you liked sweet things, you could ask for mulsum, which is wine mixed with honey. This was a small luxury that wasn't often available in simple taverns. People drank while standing up, holding clay cups loosely between talks. A worker might take a sip of stew, wipe his mouth with the back of his hand, and then get right back into a heated argument about the next thing. Fight between gladiators. Wine made people talk more, calmed them down, and made the busy time of day feel less busy. It also led to more reckless conversations, sharp jokes about corrupt officials, bold fantasies about getting rich, or quiet comments about attractive neighbors walking by. But wine wasn't the only important drink. Water from Rome's famous fountains, which are fed by aqueducts, also played a role. Boys from the Thermopylaeum brought it back in ceramic jugs, weaving through crowds as they carried back valuable goods. To the bar, fresh water cooled the pots, made the stews less thick, and made the kitchen less hot all the time. But Romans didn't often drink it by itself. Many people thought that plain water was bad for you unless it was mixed with wine or boiled into broth. Romans found the perfect drink to go with street food in the constant mixing of water and wine, as fresh and lively as the city itself. Every customer raised their cup with the same simple joy, whether they were rich, poor, sober, or a little drunk. A little bit of comfort in the middle of Rome's never-ending mess. It was never just about the food at a Thermopolian. It was about getting around the wild and unpredictable streets of Rome. There was a whole ecosystem of opportunists, performers, and troublemakers who thrived in the crowded chaos, hiding behind every comforting bowl of stew and friendly debate about gladiators. A man could walk into the tavern hungry and relaxed, but he always kept one hand on his money. Yes, Rome was beautiful, but there were also a lot of people there who were ready to take advantage of a moment's distraction, something to take your mind off of. The pickpockets were some of the best. They were usually young boys or thin teenagers working in pairs. One would bump into a customer by accident, maybe spilling some wine on his tunic, while the other would quickly slip their fingers into a purse. The thief had already disappeared into the crowd by the time the victim muttered a curse and cleaned up the mess. Thermopolia were great places to hunt because they were busy, loud, and full of people talking and juggling bowls and cups. Just one moment of laughter or a thief only needed to be annoyed, but not everyone in the crowd was a threat. A lot of people came just to have fun. Street performers hung around the Thermopolium entrances, hoping that the smell of hot food would bring in people and money. A juggler might throw clay cups into the air and balance one on his head while kids screamed with joy. A flute player stood by a fountain and played a sweet song that cut through the noise. Some storytellers told heroic epics or whispered scandalous stories, changing. Their performance depended on who came to listen. Their presence made the lunch more fun and colorful, turning it into a moment of shared laughter. But there were other dangers on the streets as well, risks that weren't caused by criminals. If a horse got scared, it could suddenly run away, causing carts to crash into market stalls. A delivery of amphe could spill. Pieces of pottery are spread out over the stones. And in the busiest neighborhoods, a small fire in an apartment nearby could send waves of smoke down the street, making it hard to see. People ran away in fear. At times like these, customers grabbed their bowls and ran as fast as they could, cursing the city's cramped layout, but accepting it as part of the everyday life. Even with all of this, Romans kept going back to the Thermopylae. The threat didn't stop them. It was just one more thread in the huge living tapestry of Rome. Eating here meant fully embracing the city with its warmth, flavor, danger, and unending pulse. And for most Romans, that was enough of a reason to stay. When the sun went down behind the rooftops of Rome, the Thermopylaeum started to change. The day's heat turned into a warm glow. The shadows grew longer on the cobblestones, and the busy midday slowly turned into something more relaxed, calm, and almost reflective. But the tavern didn't really quiet down, not in a city that didn't sleep much. Instead, it changed its rhythm to show how important these simple street taverns were to the culture of ancient Rome. For the Romans, the Thermopylaeum was more than just a place to eat. It was the closest thing they had to a neighborhood center, a public living room, and a place to escape. The majority of the people in the city lived in cramped insulin walls, smoky hallways, and kitchens that were too small. People didn't eat in their homes, they slept there. So when they were hungry, they could find food on the street. The sharp taste of garum in the warm jars of stew, the sound of bowls hitting stone counters, and the easy company of strangers. In this way, the Thermopylaeum turned into a big equalizer. Here, fishermen and clerks worked side by side, and freedmen and slaves whispered gossip next to tired craftsmen. Even the occasional soldier on leave would stop by, armor dusty and sword clanging softly at his side as he ordered a quick portion of pulse. In Rome, rank was important everywhere. Here, though, everyone stood in the same position, bowl in hand, waiting for the ladle to scrape the bottom of the pot. There were new conversations at night. Older men stayed longer, arguing politics or remembering fights from when they were young. Young lovers stole glances at each other while drinking watered wine. People who worked late shifts came in hungry and were glad that the tavern's coals were still glowing. People who were traveling even used the Thermopylaeum as a compass. If you wanted to know what a neighborhood was like, all you had to do was listen to the people who were talking in the street tavern. And even though not many customers said it out loud, the Thermopylaeum also had a quiet, emotional weight. It gave comfort after a long day and a sense of home in a city. That changed all the time, and friendship in a world where most people had to fight hard just to stay alive. A warm bowl of lentils couldn't make problems go away, but it could make a person feel grounded, human, and alive. The owner cleaned the counters, banked the embers, and stacked empty bowls before closing time. The cycle would start over again tomorrow. Rome would wake up hungry, loud, and restless, and the thermopolium would be ready to feed not only bodies, but also the very spirit of the city, before the first light of dawn touched. The Ashigaru barracks were already waking up on the tiled roofs of Edo. Discipline, routine, and the quiet acceptance that even in peacetime, the role of a warrior never really slept shaped these foot soldiers' lives. Their day didn't start with free time. Instead, it started with the sharp wooden hoshigi clapped together by a supervising officer. The sound echoed through the wooden hallways like a command from the dark itself. One hit was enough to wake up even the soundest sleeper. Inside, the long Ashigaru got up from simple straw mats that were neatly arranged in rows in a sparsely furnished room. The men's bedding wasn't soft, but they didn't seem to care. They were used to how hard life was as a soldier. Each man folded his thin futon in a way that was second nature to him, making sure the corners were perfect. There was no room for anything to look messy in the barracks, not clothes or blankets. There isn't a single pair of sandals left at the wrong angle. Order showed loyalty, and loyalty showed honor. The faint smell of the fire from the night before still hung in the air. The fire was still going. Someone quietly added a small bundle of kindling to the embers in the fireplace, which made the flames come back to life and gave the room a warm amber glow. Ashigaru warmed their hands just long enough to get rid of the morning chill before going on with their work. There was a lot of silence in the beginning, but it was broken by the sound of fabric rustling, wooden buckets clattering, and floorboards creaking as men got ready for another long day. Sweeping the courtyard was a common morning chore, an exercise in being aware as well as being clean. Ashagaru moved in lines, sweeping gravel paths, fallen leaves, and thin clouds of dust with long-handled bamboo brooms. Their movements were steady, rhythmic, and almost ceremonial. The samurai way of life said that you had to be ready all the time, even in Edeto, which was a peaceful city. Living in an organized space kept the mind sharp. After the sweeping, the equipment was checked. We looked for cracks in the spears. Spearheads were polished until they shone, even in low, light armor pieces. Light, useful, and not often used in real battles, were aired out and dusted off. Even if a man's clothes spent most of the day hanging in storage, they showed how much he was worth. The Ashigaru only lined up in the courtyard when everything was ready. The cold morning air made their breath fog up as they waited for orders. The sun had not fully risen yet, but they were already at work. This was how life went for Ashigaru: calm, disciplined, and based on the idea that a warrior should always be ready for war, even in times of peace. Must get up before everyone else. There was a lot of discipline in an Ashigaru's daily life, but nothing grounded them more than the meals that kept them going. The food in the barracks was plain, basic, and necessary. It wasn't as fancy as samurai banquets or as rich as the homes of merchants. But for the Ashigaru, these meals were the calm center of every day. The morning meal was always the same: white rice that has been steamed and served in a wooden bowl that is still warm from the pot. Rice was more than just food. It was the sign of a domain's wealth and the base of the whole hierarchy. Getting a daily ration, even a small one, was a reminder that the Ashigaru worked directly for their lord. Each grain had a purpose. Along with the rice, there was miso soup, which was thin but comforting. It was made by mixing fermented soybean paste with hot water. Sometimes, when there were enough supplies, they added bits of tofu or green onion to the dish, pickles. Tukamono gave each meal a sharp, salty taste: pickled cucumber, daikon, or plum. The strong taste they have cut through the blandness of rice and kept the palate awake. Sometimes they served dried fish that was tough and salty, which reminded people of how much Japan depended on the sea. They got a small piece of fresh fish or boiled vegetables on rare days when the domain's budget allowed it or when the quartermaster was feeling generous. People quietly celebrated these times, but never in public. Being modest was part of being a soldier. People ate their meals quickly and without talking. A shagaru lowered while sitting cross-legged. They bowed their heads, not because they were scared, but because it was what they always did. It was not okay to talk during meals. The food was supposed to feed the body, not take up the mind. The wooden bowls made a soft sound when they hit the floor, and the chopsticks made a soft sound when they hit the edges. The steam from the miso soup made the barracks smell warm and earthy. The lunch meal was often like the breakfast meal, but sometimes it was porridge instead of rice, which was stretched thin to feed a lot of people. But dinner time was the quietest and most thoughtful time of day. After hours of guard duty or drilling, Ashigaru met up again for rice, soup, and pickles. The soft amber light from the lanterns made shadows on the wooden walls. They didn't eat like noble warriors. Their meals were simple, not fancy, and not very varied. But these simple rations kept them going, giving them energy for the long, boring days that were typical of life in the Edo period. In a world where battles were rare, food became a kind of quiet discipline, a daily reminder that strength came from both patience as well as steel. After breakfast, the barracks courtyard became a place to train. Even though Japan was under the long rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, the Ashigaru were still expected to train as if war could break out at any time. The spear, or yari, was their main weapon, and they had to practice it over and over again to get good at it. Not graceful sword fighting or poetic jewels, but thrust, step, recover, again and again. The yari looked simple, but it wasn't. A long wooden shaft with a polished top, blade made of steel. The length of a spear could be anywhere from 2 meters to almost twice that, depending on the area. Ashigaru didn't carry these weapons for show. He did it for practical reasons. Spears made distance, control, and formation possible, which were the main parts of battlefield strategy in the past. Even though wars were no longer going on, the old ways still required people to be ready. The first thing they did in training was stance work. Ashigaru put their feet in gravel, bent their knees, and relaxed their shoulders. An officer walked behind them, using the butt of his gun to fix their posture. Spear. A tap on the leg meant to go down. A tap on the shoulder said to calm down. A louder tap and a sigh meant to do it again. Then came drills with thrusts. There were 100 thrusts forward, 100 thrusts angled, and 100 sweeping motions meant to break the charge of an imaginary rider. Every move had to be sharp, controlled, and in time with the group. The spears sliced through the air in perfect time, and the wooden shafts vibrated slightly with each strike. The sound of training, shuff, 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 echoed through the courtyard like a heartbeat, quickly gathered even on cool mornings. Some men gritted their teeth, while others held their breath to keep their strength. Some younger recruits trained with too much enthusiasm, making their thrusts too big. Older soldiers who had learned that true discipline was quiet, steady, and unshowy looked on with amusement. Ashigaru practiced moving in formation in addition to the drills. Rows moved as one, stepping forward and back with perfect timing. Officers yelled out orders. There were short, sharp sounds in the air. The men turned, lowered their spears, and then raised them again, making lines that looked like the ones their ancestors made on chaotic Singu battlefields. By late morning, my arms hurt, my thighs burned, and my palms hurt from holding the wooden shaft. But training almost never ended early. Even when there was no war, people judged Ashigaru by how well they followed the rules and how well they worked together. Even if a warrior wasn't in a war, they were still expected to act like one. And so the spear drills went on every day, day after day, not for glory, but for duty, tradition, and the quiet pride of being part of a line of soldiers whose strength came from doing the same thing over and over. Guard duty tested the spirit, while spear training built the body. During the Edo period, which was a time of peace that the Tokugawa shogunate kept very well, there weren't many battles, but there were a lot of rules. It was necessary to keep an eye on castles, gates, bridges, storehouses, and official residences all the time. The Ashigaru, who were the lowest ranking warriors, did this long, boring watch. It was both a privilege and a burden. Every day, the assignments changed. One morning, a man might be standing at the castle gate next to the huge wooden doors and greeting officials as they went by. Another day, he might walk around the outer moat, listening to the croak of frogs and the hum of people in the distance. He would also keep an eye out for thieves, drunks, or people who looked suspicious. At night, he might keep an eye on the fire watch towers, looking out for the dreaded glow of fire. In a crowded wooden city like Edo Guard, the worst fear was having to be quiet. Hours went by with nothing more than a nod to a passing merchant or a quiet talk with another guard at the end of a shift. The Ashigaru stood with a spear or staff in one hand, armor tied neatly, and a neutral look on their face that showed they were alert, but not angry. People didn't like it when you showed you were bored. It was worse to show that you were tired. The warrior ethos said that you should always be calm and steady. but in their heads. Drifted, some people quietly read poetry. Others thought about what they would do on their next day off. Some of them daydreamed about getting a small promotion or award, even though men of their rank didn't often get these kinds of things. Many people just put up with it, knowing that their watch was part of the hidden machinery that kept Edito safe and in order. Sometimes something broke up the boredom. A noble procession went by in a blur of shiny palanquins and bright flags. A group of loud workers needed to be calmed down. A child who was lost came up, crying, and the Ashiguru led him back to his mom. Once in a while, a fire bell rang, and then every second was important. Every man jumping into action to direct people, set up barriers, and organize buckets of water. On most days, though, guard duty was quiet. The city did not start a rebellion. Samurai didn't rush through the gates, and thieves didn't often try to commit bold crimes near watch posts. Even when it felt thankless, Ashigaru did their job well. In peace, their biggest strength was patience. They were warriors, but they didn't protect battlefields. Instead, they protected the fragile calm of the world around them. Ashigaru lived in a world where small, useful tasks filled the quiet parts of their days, not heroic battles. They spent a lot of time training and on guard duty. During the Edeto period, there was peace, so most foot soldiers spent more time cleaning, fixing, and maintaining things than fighting. Life between wars became a slow rhythm of survival, daily tasks, and little pleasures. A lot of Ashigaru turned to fishing when they had some free time. With nothing more than a bamboo rod and a simple line, they walked to nearby rivers or castle mows, hoping to catch carp or small river fish that they could cook over a small fire. Fishing was more than just getting food. It was a rare time when I was alone. They could relax by the water and listen to the soft ripples of the currents. Their lives were otherwise full of orders and responsibilities. Some people never caught anything, but it still felt better to go home empty-handed than to stay, stuck inside the barracks. Some people spent the time doing maintenance work. Armor gets stiff if you don't take care of it, and spears dull quickly. A shigaroo would often sit outside in the shade and carefully oil spear shafts, tighten armor cords, or patch up worn tabby socks. The work was boring, but it kept me grounded. It reminded them that a warrior cared for his tools as much as a monk cared for his temple, even if no enemy marched against their land. Some men grew small vegetable gardens close to the barracks, little pieces of dirt, where they grew herbs, green onions, or radishes to make their otherwise bland meals taste better. These gardens didn't take up much room or require much skill, but they made me feel proud. A few fresh greens shared with friends could turn a regular pot of rice into a small feast. In the summer, a shigaroo would gather under trees to fix straw sandals, carve wooden charms, or just talk. They didn't talk about big plans. They talked about real problems. The price of rice, how their bosses act, or the little hopes they had for their families. Some men even practiced writing by carefully tracing letters on scrap paper with their brushes. Without war, Life was a long lesson in how to be patient. These simple, humble, quiet, and often ignored tasks kept the Ashagaru grounded. Their days weren't filled with the glory of heroic charges or the noise of battle. Instead, they were filled with the steady, boring tasks that kept them going. And in a lot of ways, this slow beat. They were shaped more deeply than any battlefield ever could. Many Ashigaru had a surprisingly quiet inner world, even though they had tough jobs and were not very important. The long peace of the Edo period meant that they had long breaks between their duties, which could have turned into boredom or restlessness. Instead, many people turned inward and embraced the arts that had been respected in Japan for a long time. Among these, writing haiku and doing simple calligraphy became soft friends in an otherwise strict life. The Ashigaru liked haiku because it was simple and clear. It didn't want fancy ink, expensive paper, or a lot of schooling. It just wanted people to watch, be honest, and be quiet for a short time. A shigaroo might sit under the eaves of a barracks after a day of polishing spears or standing guard at a castle gate and listen to the wind rustle through the bamboo. In that quiet space, he could fit a feeling, a season, or a short moment into 17 syllables, like a frog jumping into water or the sound of an old gate creaking. Dusk, the light from the lantern shakes on a rainy night. These weren't the big ideas that noble poets wrote about. They were the small truths of everyday life as a soldier. It wasn't about impressing others when you wrote haiku. It was about finding your center and getting one moment of clarity in a world where rules and obligations rule. Calligraphy, while more difficult, also gave me comfort. Ashigaru often used cheap brushes and ink that had been watered down to make them last longer. They traced the strokes of simple characters over and over again, going slowly. Exactness. The goal wasn't to be perfect, but to get better, which was like their martial training. You had to keep your hands steady, control your breathing, and balance each brushstroke. In some ways, it was like fighting in a war against impatience, distraction, and self doubt. A few Ashigaru kept diaries where they wrote down their thoughts, the weather, or small things that happened during the day. Some soldiers sent poems to each other, which helped them form quiet bonds in a life where privacy was hard to come by. People who couldn't read or write sometimes asked their friends to write poems for them, which kept memories alive in ink. These creative activities made barracks life less stressful. They let the Ashigaru stay warriors without turning into stone. For men who spent their days polishing weapons they rarely used, art was a gentle reminder that there was more to life than duty, that a soldier could still be a person with feelings, thoughts, and a quiet desire for meaning, in a time of peace when swords. It was often the ink brush, not the spear, that shaped a Nigaru's heart. A Shigaru's lords shaped their discipline, but their deeper sense of balance came from something quieter, faith. During the Edo period, everyday life and spiritual practice were very closely linked. Shrines were a steady place to go for even low-ranking warriors who didn't see battle very often and were often unsure of what would happen next. Prayer, ritual, and small acts of devotion made their emotional rhythm was just as important as their training or guard duty. There were small Shinto shrines near almost every castle town. They were usually hidden under tall cedars or next to quiet footpaths. Ashigaru would often go to these shrines during breaks. They would walk slowly and bow their heads as they approached the wooden torii gate. They washed their hands in the purification basin where cold water flowed over their calloused palms from practicing with spears. It was a small thing, but it stood for clearing the mind. The world inside the shrine grounds seemed to breathe out. There were crickets singing and leaves rustling above. The wind chimes softly hit each other. Here, the strict rules of barracks life started to let go. Ashigaru clapped twice, bowed deeply, and whispered their hopes, which were small and not very grand. Some people prayed for good weather or health. Some people prayed for their families who lived far away in other villages. Some people just asked for the strength to get through another year of duty. The paths lit by lanterns glowed softly at night as Ashigaru walked to. Buddhist temples in the area too. Buddhism helped them look inside themselves and remember that pain and suffering are a normal part of life. They felt the weight of their daily lives lift, even if only for a short time, when they heard a monk's chant coming from the temple hall. Seasonal festivals were especially important to them. Ashigaru got together with people from the town on New Year's Day to pray, ring bells, and drink sweet rice wine to stay warm.